Messi. Oh, brilliant skill from Lionel Messi. Surging forward with real menace here. Brilliant from Messi. Oh, what a goal that
is! What makes something be universally perceived as outstanding? I think it's very interesting how someone can know absolutely nothing about a topic in specific.
He looks, he gives to Jordan. Jordan to the circle, puts the shot in the air. Good! The game's over, and the Bulls have won. Jordan beat him at the buzzer with a jump shot.
And still recognize something as marvelous just by looking at it or experiencing it. It is this very thing that makes it quite tragic when something of exceptional quality is not recognized for how amazing it is. The so-called cult classics that were not appreciated at their time and did not achieve financial success, but due to their quality, retained a passionate fan base.
You're fucking kidding, right?
And even more tragic than all of that is when the quality that makes something so good also dooms it and prevents it from getting the recognition that, in my opinion, it rightfully deserves. I absolutely adore The Legend of Zelda. It is a magical series and one of the best video game franchises ever made. And I also love Super Mario. I don't think it's just my inner child talking. It's a series with a lot of mechanical complexity. And I know for a fact that I'm not alone. Nintendo is one of the few developers that has maintained an impressive pedigree throughout its long history developing games. Even if I am less than happy with the recent entries. Now I got a caveat to mention, for some of you at least. I still like Nintendo, so please go to the video next door. I am a believer. Thank you very much. The reason that I'm saying all of this is because I don't want you to think that I'm dismissing the competition when I make the following claim. I'm very well aware that these are heavyweights. And despite all of that, I honestly believe that Metroid is the best series Nintendo has ever made. Now, some of you might be thinking that, if Metroid is so good, why doesn't it sell? Well, yes, if you look at a lot of Nintendo franchises, they print money. But when you look at Metroid, it's a different story.
Mamma mia!
Now, remember that Messi clip I played at the very start of the video? Hold on. Please don't go away yet. Look at the keys for a second. I know sports ball is not generally one of the topics you gaming connoisseurs care about. And fear not, for I count myself among your ranks. I'm also not a football aficionado, unless the World Cup is involved. But just look at this play. It is marvelous. I'm very sure that even if you are not football fans, you can appreciate just how good it is.
Have you seen a better goal than that anywhere this season? I very much doubt it.
But that's the thing. None of you care about Metroid either. Well, not most of you at least. According to the sales data.
Oh man.
But that is to be expected, of course. After all, not everyone can have such refined tastes. But fear not, unwashed gaming masses, for now I will impart my knowledge to you Let it blaze across the black sea that is your mediocre gaming library. That last bit was a joke, but I would still appreciate any enraged comment to drive the algorithm. Yet, what I truly want is, just like with the Messi goal, where even if you're not a fan of the sport, you can appreciate how good it is. I wish to convert some of you into the Metroid cult, fan base. And even if I fail to do just that, I still want you to be able to appreciate how good it is, even if only from an outsider's perspective. So if you're an outsider to the series, the question must remain in your mind. If Metroid is so good, why does it sell so poorly? Even at the peak of the series' popularity with Metroid Dread in 2021, it didn't even crack the top 10 of its own system. It still lost to a third-party competitor like Monster Hunter Rise. Let's not even delve into Nintendo other first-party games. And I was being very honest when I said that many of the qualities that make Metroid such a standout are also what makes it very unappealing for a lot of people. The core pillars that make Metroid what it is are also the things that put a lot of people away from the series. And I do not wish to just talk out of my ass. I actually want to back up my point of view. I wish to reach and explain the root of the problem here, so I can elucidate why a series like Metroid has such abysmal sales compared to its outstanding quality. And now, I did smelt my own farts back then, criticizing other people's gaming tastes. But I don't want my argument to just be, well, you peasants are unable to understand what makes Metroid so good. It's 'cause you're stupid. But worry not, because I'm a dumbass as well, and I can appreciate Metroid just fine. So bring out your scan visors and let's investigate together. The first question we must answer is, what are the pillars that make Metroid Metroid? As it goes with any discussion, I'm sure many of you can disagree what these pillars are, or how many are there. But at least in my opinion, you can distill Metroid to 3 core pillars. Exploration, primarily player-driven exploration. A strong atmosphere, permeated by a feeling of isolation. And finally, power-up gated progression, preferably one that can be sequence breaked if you are able to obtain an item earlier than intended. While sequence breaking itself is not something that is fundamental to the Metroid series, it's always welcome, at least for me. Now, I'm sure many of you will be very quick to point out that these 3 core pillars are present in multiple highly regarded and highly popular game series. But fret not, we will cover that as we go along. Now, while we can't go through all 3 Metroid pillars, I think that's too much ground to cover for just one video. So in this case, we're just gonna cover both exploration and atmosphere. Exploration is the most important topic, and also the longest one to touch upon. That's why we're gonna leave it for last, despite being, at least for me, the most important part of the series. So, I've rambled long enough. Let's jump into the first pillar and talk about it. I'm gonna try to keep this section very brief, because there's very little to talk about other than the appeal to emotion about what I consider to be important for this pillar of Metroid. The atmosphere is a fundamental part of the Metroid series. I have 2 main anecdotes that I want to get into to try to express why even the developers considered this part to be very important. As the Metroid series was being developed, its main composer, Kenji Yamamoto, didn't want to just make catchy tunes or something that felt out of place. His goal was for the music and the score to reflect the feeling of actually being there. This is why the soundtrack of a lot of the Metroid games is much more reserved compared to its contemporaries. This decision allows the player to feel immersed every time they step into the games, even if they are the 2D ones. Another anecdote that I really enjoy is that while Retro was developing the Prime series, Shigeru Miyamoto asked them a question. What if Samus had the head of a bug? A lot of the staff at Retro didn't really understood what he meant, until they realized Samus' point of view. What if her point of view was that of a bug? How would the world look from her eyes? This is what led into the creation of the different visors for the Prime series that allows us to see through Samus' eyes. And this also means that Nintendo really understood that what made Metroid special was for the player to feel immersed in its world. I really wish to get my point across, and also to allow the games to speak for themselves. Therefore, I'm gonna play a few clips for a short duration, so you can see what I'm talking about. Well, I hope that with that you could understand what I'm getting at, and why the atmosphere in the Metroid series is so important. Now, I know what you're going to say. There are many other series that are all about atmosphere and immersion, but can you tell me how many of those games are you completely alone with not a single soul to talk to you for your entire journey? I think you might kinda struggle to come across that, as the only one that you might find is the Subnautica games, and the other being Animal Well, and that is what makes the atmosphere on the Metroid series different. It's further emphasized by the feeling of isolation, and while in both Fusion and Dread there is an AI, Adam, guiding the player, you still feel like you're very much alone. And among fans, that AI is sometimes a very contentious character, because people really consider that you should be alone. And this is even worse in Metroid Prime 3, where you're constantly running across the Federation. It just doesn't really fit the series. The thing is, humans just aren't built to be alone. We have evolved as social animals. There are multiple studies that well document the effects of isolation among humans. It's just not good. I'm not gonna get into those studies right now, as I feel like the video is long enough already, and I feel like this is a generally understood topic. This is why a lot of games will give you a character to talk to, or a character that just talks to you. Even if it's a one-way street, the fact that you're feeling like you're not alone really helps the player be more at ease. This means that this quality of the Metroid series of being alone and isolated with nobody to talk to is just something that a lot of people don't like, which is very understandable. Yet my argument is that even if a lot of people don't like this, this is a very important part of the series. As the series has tried to become more popular, they have tried to include more characters to talk to you as you progress on your adventure. So in other words, one of the things that makes Metroid so unique and amazing for a lot of people is the same thing that puts a lot of players away. But anyway, now I think it's time that we get to the meat and potatoes of the video, the most important part, which is gonna be exploration. It's gonna be a long one, so I'm gonna ask you to be patient, because it's gonna be worth it by the end. A lot of games heavily focus on exploration. Not only that, some of the highest selling games of all times will pridefully boast about the size of their sandboxes, asking the player to look everywhere and dig into every nook and cranny. And that exploration that we love so much is itself a process of navigation. In 2008, a book was published under the name of Video Game Spaces, Imagine, Play, and Structure in 3D Worlds by Michael Nitsche, talks about the navigational process. In it, Nitsche mentions that while navigation is a common everyday thing for humans, that doesn't mean it's not a complex process. When it comes to video games, the author goes a bit further. To quote him, "In addition, multi-layered access often adds more depth to navigation, raising the level of complexity further. The player receives assistance through the level of abstraction in game worlds, as interfaces often refer to physical actions. To put it on more simple terms, navigating a video game world is quite a complex task. We are used to it as people that play video games regularly, but those inexperienced can struggle with the process. And those that are experienced can also get lost quite easily. That is why it's very common for developers to guide us through different means through the environment. Now, this guidance can be more direct, such as using waypoints or the infamous yellow paint, or it can be a bit more nuanced by using different elements that might catch our attention or limiting our choices. Nitsche's study was quoted by a wonderful paper written on this year, titled Analyzing the Challenge of Navigation Through the Metroid Series by Keaton and José Zagal. In this study, the process of navigation is divided into 3 steps, and it is in these 3 steps that it is made very clear how different the Metroid series handles exploration compared to the average game, and we will cover the differences in each of those steps. First of all is the destination, which is determining where we actually need to go. Most games will try to make that destination as clear as possible. They will not only tell the player where do they need to go and why, but they will also add additional abstract elements like Nitche talked about. One of the easiest examples of this are map markers, which are UI elements that tell the player directly on a map where they're supposed to be headed. These mark a heavy contrast with the Metroid series, where the player themselves is supposed to figure out where they are supposed to go next. A harsh example of this is the grapple beam and the wreck ship in Super Metroid. The player obtains the grapple beam at the bottom of the currently explored map, and the player is tasked to remember to use it in a room nearing the start of the game, at the other side of the map. While reaching that destination might not be hard due to the shortcuts unlocked by the player, actually knowing where to go does pose a challenge. This marks a heavy contradistinction between how Metroid handles this step of the navigation process and other games. As I said before, many other successful games heavily focus on exploration, but the difference is that in those games, it is up to the player to decide the destination. In this sense, those games are very liberating and allow for a lot of player freedom. The Metroid series, on the other hand, will restrict the player a lot more. There is a lot more player accountability when it comes to figure out where to go next. Either the player figures them out, or they do not, and end up getting lost. Getting lost can lead to a lot of player frustration, which other games try to avoid like it's the plague. Yet, in Metroid, getting lost is part of the charm of the game, finding yourself in an unfamiliar situation and slowly figuring out where do you need to go. More recent entries in the series have helped the player a bit more with this step of navigation, such as Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission, giving waypoints to the players of the destination they're supposed to reach next, or the Prime games giving tips to the players if they find themselves to be lost for an extended period of time. But even if those games put less emphasis on the first step of exploration, they continue to put a heavy emphasis on the second step, routing. The study describes routing as the decision-making phase of navigation. This is the moment where the player already knows where they need to go, but they are yet unsure of how to get there. A good example that is brought by the study mentions a treasure chest behind an unbreakable glass wall. The player knows they must reach the treasure chest, but they don't know how to get to it. In the vast majority of games, such examples are reserved for secrets or side activities. Developers will go very far to try and prevent the player from getting lost, and aiding them in the routing process at every step possible. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as there are various forms of challenges, and finding your way forward is not always the correct challenge for the game in question. I also believe there is a lot of artistry in guiding the player in subtle ways. And before you ask, no, the previously mentioned yellow paint is not one of those subtle ways. This is a very interesting topic that I will not delve into further, but if you wish to know more, Game Maker's Toolkit did a fantastic video about it, which I will link in the description below. The Metroid series once again differs from the norm, and will require the player to figure out how to actually progress in the game. Even the games that help the player by telling them the destination still expect the player to figure out how to actually get there. This means that in most games, actually reaching your destination is not a part of the intended developer's challenge. Therefore, players will be aided in how to reach that destination. One of the few exceptions to these are the Breath of the Wild style Zelda games. Now, while I didn't like Tears of the Kingdom, I'm a very big defender of Breath of the Wild, even if I do prefer previous Zelda entries. This is mostly because I think it's very commendable to hold the player accountable during the routing process in open world games. If you look at most open world games, you don't actually need to really think how do you reach your destination. You generally just walk straight to it, generally facing little to absolutely no resistance from the game. On the Breath of the Wild style games, planning the most efficient way to reach your destination is a very involved process that I really enjoy. But I think I've gotten my point across about this section of the navigation process, so let's just move to the next one. Execution. This is the part of the process where the player's ability to physically interact with the game is put to the test. This can be as easy as just jumping over an enemy, or pulling out the sickest Shine Spark challenge you've ever seen. As you might have guessed, this is the part of the navigational sequence that most games will put their challenge on, which is perfectly reasonable. The Metroid series is not so much about the actual execution of platforming. Don't get me wrong, there's a decent challenge to be found here, especially when you're trying to complete the game as quickly as possible, through speedrunning, or when you're trying to pull out some interesting sequence break moments, but that is usually reserved for side activities, some additional upgrades, or some really tough Shine Spark puzzles. If you have been paying attention, I'm sure that you might have noticed something quite interesting. Like I've said before, other games will challenge the player's ability to properly route, but that is generally reserved for secrets and side bonuses. On the Metroid series, the ability to properly execute is reserved for those very same side activities and additional secrets. This means that the Metroid series' priorities on what to test the player on is inverted compared to the rest of the industry. And well, as you can guess, a lot of people aren't very happy about that. Video games train us to interact with them in a very specific way. And if games always help us with the navigational process, we're clearly not going to be very good with that. This means that the vast majority of players have not been tested on, and therefore have not developed the necessary skill set required to navigate through the Metroid series, which is no fault of their own, and doesn't necessarily mean that they're too dumb to get Metroid. But it will mean that when they actually get their hands on one and try it, they're gonna fail, and they're gonna get frustrated. And this is gonna happen.
What? Why? Why? There's no indication on the map, there's no indication visually.
And now, I'm sorry if this part of the video has taken a bit longer than expected, but I think this is the most important reason as to why Metroid doesn't sell. And also, I have found something that I have never seen ever brought up on this topic before. I genuinely believe I'm the first one to actually cover this topic, for the general audience at least. So please, hold on a bit longer on this section of the video, because this is the real deal. I'm talking about cognitive load theory. Cognitive load theory was presented by John Sweller in 1988. And I'm sure many of you guys are asking, what the hell does this have to do with Metroid? But don't worry, I'm getting at it. Cognitive load theory, to put it on very simple terms, talks about working memory and its limitations. Essentially, every person has a limited amount of working memory. As we're working on solving a problem, we can acquire new information as we go along. But there is a limit to how much information our working memory can process. And if we exceed that capacity, we will greatly struggle to solve the problem in question. Now just have that in mind. This is what is used while we're problem solving. And do you guys remember the most important part of the navigational process for the Metroid series? That's right, it was routing. Because even though the series progressed, routing was still always relevant, even when they were giving you directions. And even when execution started to become more of a focus on more recent entries of the series, routing is still the cornerstone of the navigational process for the Metroid series. And do you guys remember what was routing supposed to be for the navigational process? It was the problem-solving step of navigation, and cognitive load puts a limit on how much information we can get as we're problem solving. What this means is that the Metroid series will be especially strenuous on the cognitive load of its players, particularly those that are not used to this type of challenge.
Objection!
Do you have any actual proof that this works the way it does? So far, unless you have actual evidence like a paper, it's just baseless theory. Dang, he's right. I've been just yapping away about my opinion without actually backing up my arguments. You know, like a YouTuber. Is there something I can do about this? Do I have no way to back this up? Hold on, random strawman. I do have proof. Remember the study we talked about earlier? About the challenges of navigating through the Metroid series? They also talk about cognitive load in the challenge of navigation. Yes, that is correct. The study we have covered before does talk about cognitive load and the challenge of navigation. And it talks about how it relates to both destination and routing. And it goes further than that. It also relates to the ease of task completion and how this concept is easily applied to video games. I'm gonna go ahead and quote the study for a while. Simply put, a high cognitive load will lead to impaired ability to perform cognitively dependent tasks. If a player has a lot to remember at once, it may not limit their ability to move and act through the game world. but it will keep them from easily and successfully performing cognitive tasks, like decision making. This has a direct relationship with navigation, specifically destination and routing, as this task relies on the player memory and mental abilities. A player suffering from greater cognitive load will find it harder to succeed at these challenges. As such, cognitive load is a direct way to scale the difficulty of destination finding and routing, e.g., providing the player with more things to keep track of as a way of increasing difficulty. This means that the challenges that Metroid puts against the players are very different from the rest of the industry. They don't focus on execution, they focus on problem solving by taxing the player's working memory through their cognitive load. And that is a very different type of challenge from what any other game offers. So while this is an amazing thing that makes Metroid unique, it also puts off a lot of players. And if Metroid was to change in this aspect to be more popular, it will also lose a big part of its identity. Well, that is all for the exploration section of the video. So I thank you for sticking through it, and I hope you learned something new. So at this point, I've talked for a very long time. This video really got out of hand. I really expected to just make a very short 10 to 15 minutes video. And as you can see by the video length, I kinda overshoot a bit. And believe it or not, I really caught a lot of things from the final video. I wanted to talk about so many things, like the emotions the Metroid series will elicit from the player. I wanted to talk about its story, and so many more things. But I'm very happy with the end result of the video. So now we're gonna just move to our closing thoughts. Before I give those closing thoughts, I wanna play two videos. One by David Jeffy and the other by Video Game Donkey.
I did have problems with the onboarding of Metroid Dread. I did, and I don't care. Look, if I was still hiring designers and I saw that you were one of the people pushing back on this, I would fire you or I would not hire you. Okay? Because the idea that just because you know how to do something early in the game where you're trying to learn and teach the player how to play so they can, enjoy the product that they've paid for, the fact that you know how to do it, nobody needs your gatekeeping bullshit. Your gatekeeping bullshit is probably the reason Metroid is not the huge, massive franchise that it could be, okay?
Usually happens, I'll start one up, I have a blast, shooting aliens, exploring the world, until I hit that part where the game just stops and you go, okay, now what? You shoot everything in the room, then you backtrack through this big-ass map looking for a way forward, and this will go on for 20 to 30 minutes before I just say, fuck it, and we're done. So what was I actually supposed to do? The answer is some cryptic-ass bullshit.
Now, this might come as a surprise to a lot of you, but when it comes to David Jeffy, I think he's right. I think he's correct. I don't agree that we're being gatekeeping, but I do agree that if we want Metroid to sell millions and be a greatly popular franchise, recognized by everyone, this is the kind of things that need to change. And when it comes to Donkey, even though he puts it on a more comical standpoint, his argument is essentially the same one as David Jeffy. And there you have it. That's why Metroid doesn't sell despite being amazing. It's because the things that make it really good are also the things that put a lot of people away. I really think that Metroid is just not a very accessible series. And this might be a bit contentious, but I really think it shouldn't be. What makes Metroid special and unique is that it goes against the current. It differs from the mainstream. What it decides to challenge the player on is completely different from any other game on the market. And asking the Metroid series to guide the player so that they don't get lost is to also ask for less variety in the types of experiences that games can offer us. And I am just completely against that concept. I'm not being gatekeeping. I wish everyone could give Metroid a try. But I also think that if we change it so a lot of people get to experience it on their own terms, it will also stop being Metroid. And if that is the alternative, I would rather have the series have a dignified ending rather than try to be milked for mass appeal. It is a bit sad, and like I said, quite tragic, that what makes Metroid so good is also what prevents a lot of people from getting into it. And that is why Nintendo's best franchise simply doesn't sell as well. Well, and that's the end of this video. I know the ending sounded quite sad and dramatic, but it's just what came natural from the script. So I'm sorry if it ended on a sour note. In any case, this is my first YouTube video, and I know there's a lot of problems with it. The audio quality is just not very good. My microphone is really bad. And well, overall, I just don't know if people are gonna be interested in what I continue to do, so if you could kindly share, like, subscribe, all the things that YouTubers ask you to do, I would really appreciate it. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to continue doing videos. I wish it could be more of a long-term thing, but without an income, I don't think it's gonna be possible. So, if you guys are interested in hearing more about my opinion on other games or other topics, I would really appreciate for you to let me know. In any case, I really want to thank you for watching the video throughout. I know it might not be apparent due to the video's low quality, but I really put a lot of effort into it. So, see you next mission, I guess.